Welcome, everybody. Thank you once again for joining us. Lovely rainy Friday afternoon for me. I know it's morning or possibly even evening in some parts of the world where you're all listening from. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Today we have Dio Ortega from Jensen. He's going to be talking to us all about AI, blockchain, and infrastructure, which I personally think is going to be fascinating to get some more detail on. Dio, welcome. Why don't you give yourself a little bit of an introduction before we kick off?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. So yeah, my name is Dio. I lead product for Jensen, and yeah, I've been at Jensen for almost a year. Before that, I was in Web3. So I worked at companies like Coinbase and also the Near blockchain, which is a layer one. I worked on kind of like cross chain protocols before I joined Jensen. I also worked on the Coinbase wallet team. And before that, I worked at Google. So I worked on some AI features for Gmail, like Smart Replies, Smart Compose, and all of those that help people be more productive. So I have a little bit of the intersection of AI and crypto. And that's why I joined Jensen, because it's all about crypto and AI. So yeah, really, really glad to be here.
Fantastic. That's quite some extensive experience across multiple sectors of the industry. So you would have some insight on how this all fits together naturally through the work that you've done and contributed to.
Yeah, I think so. I like to think so. But yeah, I think it's the perfect kind of like combination because as AI develops, we need a coordination layer, which can be done by crypto. Crypto is great for coordination, for kind of like transfer of value. And I personally think that kind of like AI is the killer use case that crypto has been waiting for a long time. So we've been building a lot of structure and primitives in crypto. And now with the advances in AI, I think it's finally kind of like prime time for crypto and Web3. So yeah, I'm really glad that we're doing kind of like that or trying to do that at Jensen with kind of like our mission to advance machine intelligence and machine learning using crypto as kind of like that coordination layer that is needed for everything to work out.
Yeah, excellent. Looking forward to diving into that a lot deeper momentarily. I was just thinking before we started, I personally have been working in crypto and Web3 for 5 or 6 years now, and I remember several years ago AI exploding into the public consciousness, the retail public consciousness, predominantly through things like ChatGPT. Everyone was initially suspicious and then blown away by how it could speak to you. Things kept on evolving from there. Twitter, as it was at the time, became flooded with these new things called AI agents that were all spinning up their own tokens and things like that. And then when you look more into it, there's larger companies that have been using AI for many, many years behind the scenes without any blockchain kind of influence. So I was obviously let you dive into the topic as you wish, but I'm hoping to see some of that evolution to where we are now and what comes next.
Yeah, of course. And I think you hit some important topics there that maybe could be a good segue. So you mentioned that kind of like AI has been improving a lot in the past few years since ChatGPT. I think the core reason for that is because we got more users. So more people using AI means better models. We all contribute to training better GPT models by just kind of like using it, giving our feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down on the app. So I think that's a reason why I think kind of like we need to layer in crypto so that the incentives are more aligned between users and companies that build models. I think we learned our lessons from Web 2 and kind of like the social media kind of like renaissance that a few centralized companies controlling a very important industry and piece of technology is probably not a good idea because they own our data. They kind of like sell our data to advertisers, or they use it to kind of like craft their advertisements in businesses. And so we think this is the right time to kind of like get more ownership of users to users about the models they help train. And that's what crypto is good at, to track provenance, track ownership. And so we believe in a future where like if you contribute to training a model, you should get kind of like proper ownership of that model or joint ownership of that model. And that's what crypto solves really well. So as you remember from like the NFT craze, that was a way to distribute royalties to NFT creators, even on like secondary sales. So that's kind of like the same primitives that we can use in crypto to kind of like give proper attribution to users once they kind of like help advance the system and help advance the technology of AI. And that's kind of like what we think we can use crypto for, and that's we're doing a lot of work there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, and the parallel with NFTs and creator royalties, something close to my heart personally. That's actually where I started in the industry with NFT teams. How does the combination of AI and blockchain make this easier? How do the two go together?
Yeah, so I think an interesting thing about AI that maybe is different from Web 2 is that we have a lot of open source models in companies doing open source in general. And I think AI is such an important technology for humanity, for kind of like businesses, for everything, that we need to have this parallel track of, yes, centralized companies doing frontier models that are commercial in nature, but also open source needs to be part of the equation. So we have really good open source models. We have people experimenting with open source models, which are maybe cheaper to experiment with, or you can even customize them. And so I think that's another thing that kind of like goes along with crypto. Crypto is by nature open source. Every time you publish a smart contract, it becomes open source. Anyone can verify it. It's public. And so I think those two marry very well together. So I believe us as an industry, we need to productize those open source tools and open source models, make them more user friendly, kind of like as easy to use as ChatGPT, and then again give users that ownership. If they contribute to training a model or kind of like making a model better, they should have proper kind of like ownership of that model. Then another interesting part, and we're doing a lot of experiments, as you probably saw, block assist, code assist are our early experiments with customizing models locally. So there comes the privacy angle as well, which is something we should also learn from like the Web 2 era. Privacy is important, and there are certain workflows, certain conversations with chatbots that need to stay private. And so a way to do it is if you train your model and use your model locally on your device. It can be a laptop. In the future, it can even be a mobile device. And so with Code Assist and with Block Assist, you're basically using a model that runs entirely locally. There's no API calls to an external kind of like third party. And then you're also customizing it to your liking. So that's kind of like an early preview of what could be possible in the near future, of just the users fine tuning their models to their liking and not depending on kind of like a centralized company that owns all of your data, knows all of your preferences, all of your chats with ChatGPT, and they can use that to your advantage. So again, I use ChatGPT. I'm not saying it's a bad product by any means. It's a really good product. But as you saw, they're introducing now ads on the free tier of ChatGPT. So that's kind of like a first wave of, if you're if you're using a product for free, you're probably the product. And so they will use your kind of like data to advertise, which is fine if you're fine with it. But if you're not fine with it, then there's some open source privacy by default models that you can use, and we're helping making that more user friendly, and then layering in crypto so that if you again contribute to making a model better, you can get proper ownership and kind of like have the coordination layer. Another interesting aspect, and this is kind of like more future thinking, but just to kind of like trigger that discussion, is that we're now seeing AI models being actors in an economic system. So basically, like you can exchange value between agents. There's a lot of chat about like an agent to agent economy. There's a lot of protocols being built, which are in nature open source as well, which is great, like agent to agent, MCP. And so you can easily imagine a future where agents will be trading assets with each other, and they can be stable coins, they can be kind of like data, they can be learning. You can even have models kind of like offload some computation jobs to other models that are more powerful in nature and paying for that. So we're seeing a lot of activity happening there. An example that I would give for people to look into, if you're curious, Coinbase launched an open standard called X402, which basically allows micropayments to be done on the web natively with stablecoins without having to kind of like give your credit card information to your agent, which is dangerous, or even having to go through like another provider like Stripe. So basically, that allows for agents to transact in a trusted way through the blockchain and handle micropayments between them. So again, you can think that like if an agent needs more compute because it doesn't have access to that compute, you could go through the Jensen network, kind of like pay another model or another provider for that compute, and then kind of like transact through the X402, which is an open protocol built on top of HTTP. So again, I know this all seems very futuristic, but the tools are available today. Some of the tools are available today. And as models get better, and particularly open source models, I think we're going to see a lot of development in this area. And I think, yeah, layering AI and crypto is the perfect way to make all of these works in a way that aligns incentives between users, agents, and kind of like all of the actors in these kind of like new economic future, if you will.
It's futuristic, but the future is now. We're here. There's various pieces of what you spoke about. Then was around the transactional elements of blockchain, agents paying each other and agents sourcing other resources. There are other deeper integrations of blockchain AI and the infrastructure around it, I believe.
Yeah, so basically, deeper integrations, you can think about kind of like decentralized compute, which is something that, again, Jensen is doing some work in. For decentralized compute to happen, of course, you need proper verification because, again, everything that happens on the blockchain is untrusted by default. You don't have to trust the other nodes. You can just kind of like read the smart contract, see what it does, kind of like sign a transaction, understanding what it means. And so verification becomes important because in the example that I was giving earlier, if you are offloading some compute jobs to other nodes, to other models, to other tools, then you need a way to verify that those compute jobs were properly executed before you kind of like pay for them. And so as you know, kind of like Jensen has been doing a lot of work on verification. There's a few papers out with Verdi and kind of like our verification protocol. And I think that's going to become kind of like core and center of the new agentic economy or the new economy between users and agents. So that's part of our stack. I think one of our value props, if you build on the Jensen network, is that you get access to all these primitives like kind of like reproducibility, verification, and all of those are building blocks that kind of like allow you to build a full kind of like on-chain product and platform with AI. So yeah, we'll be opening up to builders very soon and kind of like providing those tools to builders very soon. And we're very excited to see what happens on the network, not just built by us, Jensen, but also built by other members of the broader community and kind of like builders at large. The other thing I would mention, just to close out this topic, is that building is much more accessible to users today. So you don't need to kind of like write every line of code by hand by any means. So like with the advance of coding agents, we're very excited to also see what that enables in terms of kind of like community built tools where people can just kind of like start with a prompt or a high level spec and then kind of like build something great and point the agents to the documentation instead of just reading kind of like the full documentation of the tools we will provide. And so I think, again, this space is going to see a lot of progress in a lot of new tools and a lot of new products being built based on these primitives that we kind of like have been building for a few years now. Yeah, I think it's an exciting future, near future, and even far distant future with the agentic economy.
It absolutely is, and it leads very well into my next question, which is one for you very personally. What are you most excited about all of these pieces coming together, whether you're working on it or you're researching it or things you've seen in the space? What is the most exciting thing to you in the future?
Yeah, one thing that I'm personally excited about is this kind of like agentic economy. I think it's not going to come on day one that all the agents are going to be trading like real assets, so that we're going to trust agents to trade those real assets with real value. But as models get better, I think more and more kind of like small pieces of the economy are going to be handled by agents. And so I'm excited to see that. Another kind of like layer that we can talk about, which is all about kind of, it's very related to our Delphi product, is that we're also finding new ways to measure model performance and kind of like the performance of models on several tasks. In where, as you can see with the Delphi testnet product, we're finding kind of like markets for that model performance. So I think that's another area that's going to see that needs to see a lot of innovation, is just how we evaluate models today. Because as you probably saw, if you're watching this space, every new model that comes from like a labs company comes with a PDF report that says that they're basically best at everything, all the benchmarks. But all those benchmarks are getting a little bit stale because they are kind of like roughly the same. you can also train the models on the benchmarks, which means they're good at benchmarks, but not really good at the tasks kind of like that you need them for day to day.
It's like
So
just
we're
studying for the test.
exactly studying for the test or just kind of like playing with real economic value, for instance. Like there's not a lot being done there. So I think having better evals and having better ways to evaluate models is also going to determine how much we trust those models with real assets, with kind of like real world tasks that have implications in the real world. So I think again, those are two areas that I'm excited: the agentic economy, and then just kind of like having better ways to evaluate performance of models overall.
Fantastic. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about why that evaluation of the models? You briefly touched on it in what you were saying, but why is that so important to the average user?
Yeah, so basically, I'll give you an example. So if you use coding agents today, so let's assume you're building something and you want to use a coding agent. I think most of the choices done today are mostly based on vibes. You go on X and you see that like some people say that Gemini 3 is great at like design or has like a good taste, which is not even quantifiable. Some other people say that Claude Code is much better and it's like close to AGI. Then you have like the OpenAI team saying no, Codex is a lot better. It takes a little longer, but like it's better at like hard tasks. So of course there's some benchmarks, but that's pretty much based on vibe. So I think once you're a user or a consumer and you're making a choice of which model to use for certain tasks, I think you need better kind of like signal of kind of like how to pick the best model. And even like if you just stick to the OpenAI ecosystem, let's say if you open Codex on your, I don't know, VS Code or Cursor, you see a lot of choices. You see Codex, Max Reasoning, High, Very High. Those are all very confusing names. And so I believe in a world that is multimodal, so multi-model, sorry. That basically means you can use multiple models in one single project, and you need to make better decisions about how to choose them. And that's why I think like better evals are needed for you to make those informed decisions so that you know this is the perfect model for the task, and then I'm going to move on to task number 2, and I know I'm going to pick a different model. And so I think again, evals is an area that we need to improve on as an industry so that users, end users, consumers, builders make better choices or informed choices once they pick kind of like a company or a model or an open source tool to build a project, if that makes sense. And once we introduce like real economic value, as I was talking about, if you trust an agent with, I don't know, some US dollars in stable coins to like conduct, to do trading, to go on prediction markets, to do whatever you want it to do, then again, you need even better ways to evaluate performance because there's real money at stake, and it's not just kind of like a few lines of code. It's much more than that. So again, I think those two go well together. Better ways to evaluate agents, and then kind of like drive more value from using agents that drive kind of like real economic value.
Fantastic, thank you. So that's going back to the trust and the verification side. Excuse me, we had someone else joining the space there for a moment. The trust and verification side, which harkens back to some of the original ideology of blockchain itself. How are the agents or the AI, the models, going to be deployed on the blockchain and actually integrated with the whole system?
Yeah, so I think verification is a core primitive for that to happen. The same way that today in blockchain, in like traditional blockchain transactions, you have ways to validate it. You have validators, you have dispute models. If you're a validator, you stake value on the network. If you do something bad, kind of like you lose that stake. So I think we need similar primitives on kind of like models going onto the blockchain and trusting each other for ML operations, but also for anything else. So you need this kind of like end-to-end verification that is reproducible. You can check a hash, you can see that it was properly executed. You can have dispute mechanisms, which is part of the Verde protocol, the paper that we put out, kind of like ways to resolve disputes and to kind of like recompute certain tasks to make sure that things are done properly. I think basically is adding trust to kind of like what's done by models, which today it feels, for most people, it feels like a black box. You have an input, you have a prompt, and then you have an output. You don't really know what happens in the middle. Some tokens go back and forth, but you don't have a way to verify it. and even more than that, like sometimes you ask the same model the same question today and tomorrow, or today in a few hours, and you get different responses. That's why reproducibility is also important. And again, those are areas that we've done extensive research on, and we've built some core technology that you may all see in the future being productized and being released. But we think all of those primitives are really important as we kind of like move more trust to these models, and empower them with kind of like real assets, real and to drive real economic value.
Excellent, thank you. So one of the large benefits, obviously, through what you've been saying, is the bringing things out of the black box, out of a closed system. The big companies I mentioned at the beginning that have been using AI and agents for many years, but privately and quietly. How would that setup benefit from the evolution of AI and blockchain?
Yeah, so basically, it goes back to what we said at the beginning. So it's if you have something that is closed source, if you have a commercial model that is closed source, you don't really know kind of like the weights of that model. You don't know what goes into it, what training data contributed to that model, and so things are a little bit more opaque. Which is okay if you're just kind of like using one of those models for a low stakes kind of like transaction or task. But if it's something really high stakes, then you want to be able to kind of like know how that model came about, and kind of like what training data went into it, how the model makes decisions. And so yeah, I think that's kind of like that transparency is needed. And as AI takes a more important place in our world and in humanity, honestly, you need to have a way to trust those models. And so you need all those primitives instead of just trusting OpenAI or Anthropic to do the right thing, which they may end up doing or they may end up not doing, because they're companies, they're built to kind of like generate revenue. They have their investors and their shareholders, which they have kind of like some responsibilities towards. So their goal is not to advance humanity; it's to advance their own companies. And that's why I'm very bullish on open source for AI. I think it's needed. I think it's probably the way to go if we are to drive more usage of these models, and if we give them higher and higher stakes, it's kind of like they improve and get better.
Excellent. The accessibility the accessibility of verified information. What does the future of this industry, or any industry really, look like further down the track in your mind? Just imagining things now, 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah, it's really hard to say because, as you know, AI has advanced so much, even in the past, I don't know, 6 months, that it's hard to predict the future. There's a lot of chat about kind of like AGI. I think AGI is going to come in trenches and not all at once. We're probably seeing some signs of like early AGI already with some models. But yeah, I imagine a future where probably each person will have kind of like their own model that advocates for them, that kind of like knows their interests. That model ideally is fine-tuned locally or close to that user, that kind of like, yeah, that basically kind of like advocates for their interests more than anything. And so we see a world where kind of like you have all of these agents acting on behalf of users, being coordinated through blockchain, kind of like all of their actions are transparent, publicly verifiable, tracked on chain, so that again we can build this trust model on what these agents do on behalf of the user. And so we can trust that like they do the right thing, or at least verify that they do the right thing. I think that's probably kind of like where the industry is leading. If it doesn't go in that direction, we'll end up again with a few centralized companies owning AI and owning all of these outcomes. And it becomes harder for like the regular user to trust them to do the right thing because of all the other interests they have. So I imagine a world much more decentralized, much more open source, open, and kind of like where agents are free to transact, but we can also verify kind of like their work, and transfer some of that trust to them based on kind of like being able to verify it, trust but verify, and not just trust blindly, which as we know has a lot of problems. And I think again, blockchain has always operated under that kind of like assumption that all of the nodes are untrusted, but we have ways to track their actions. We have ways to kind of like see what they're doing and see what the smart contracts are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the same rules need to apply to AI, because it's such an important transformative technology that there's honestly no way around it. We have to do it.
Trust but verify, absolutely. It's something we've lived by for several years now in this industry, for sure. I love thinking about the idea that two extraordinarily revolutionary technologies have come together so well and seem to have such amazing synergy and benefits towards each other. If there was one thought,
and just
sorry, go on.
I think it's just wanted to add quickly. So yeah, I think it's kind of like in terms of timing is interesting. Crypto was developed before, which is great because now it's ready for prime time once AI comes. But it's also hard to imagine a world of this agentic kind of like economy that operates on the financial rails of the past, basically. Like you cannot imagine kind of like models transacting when there's a T+3 settlement date for like usual financial transactions. Transactions only settle in 3 days. So like models need kind of like a more immediate input. And also like the traditional ways just don't work. Like you cannot give your model your credit card and trust it to do the right thing. You have to have these sandbox environments where you have kind of like maybe a wallet with some kind of like permissions and some kind of like constraints on what the model can do. And again, I think we've been building the infrastructure in crypto, and it's now time to productize it and to make it ready for the next stage of the economy in the world.
Absolutely. I wonder what Satoshi would have thought of the way things are going and the new technologies that are being integrated. It's quite fascinating to think about.
It is, yeah.
What's the one thought that you would leave people with to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think one thought is for all of us as users of AI, beneficiaries of AI, I think we should have more control. Basically, control on everything, on the full stack. So the data that we give to the models, the data we get back to the models, kind of like how the models behave, what they do with that data. And so I think, again, it's time for us to claim control. And I think the way to go is through open source, kind of like crypto, having this coordination layer, being able to verify their work. I think again, it's a very important technology. It's very transformative for humanity. So I think control is not an option. It's a requirement. And so yeah, we have to kind of like be more on the lookout for these kind of things instead of just trusting a few companies and trusting that they will do the right thing. And I see like again because AI. Open source models have been having such great kind of like advancements, and there's a lot of companies building open source. I think the primitives are here, so it's up to all of us as an industry and all of us as users to kind of like exercise that control, exercise that ownership, and kind of like work towards a world with AI that makes sense for all of us and for humanity. Because I think that should be our goal, and that's also core to like Jensen's mission. Is kind of like build a network that advances machine learning, but also kind of like human intelligence, and that kind of like coordinates agents and humans together as partners and not as adversaries.
Amazing. The future is both exceptionally bright and very exciting. Awesome to be part of it, and can't wait to see where it all goes. Thank you so much, Dio. That was fascinating and really enjoyable talk. Sorry, I just saw you on mute, so I paused.
It was no worries. No, it was my pleasure. And if anyone here has any questions, or even people listening to the recording, feel free to drop them on the thread, and we'll go through them. But yeah, it's a fascinating feature, and I think we all have to kind of like take more ownership of it and kind of like help drive it forward, because it's all of our mission. And Jensen, of course, it's part of our mission as well.
Absolutely. Thanks again. That was fantastic. Anybody with questions, as Dio said, drop them on the thread, or you can post them in the Discord, and we can continue the conversation there. We will have more regular talks along these lines coming up very soon, so keep an eye out for announcements and schedules on those. And once again, as always, thank you so much for spending your time here with us, and we will see you next time.